Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Absolutely, we do too.
All good. Think so. Then there,
Because you're not slaughtering.
but if you wear leather,
Well, but you might be. Oh, yeah. Slaughtered animal. Opposite very far. You can use leather too. So it's natural causes. About 100. But it's a natural causes.
yeah, the whole don't want to.
Killing it. Well, if guys are now already didn't kill it.
A
Wear it.
person kill it.
Right.
But to fill it, how do we know?
Well, that's. We didn't go into that much detail.
That doesn't make sense.
The term you normal vegan
A
as
normal
opposed to an abnormal
Abnormal
vegan.
vegan, yes.
Someone else's. Won't work. Well, yeah, I mean, that's an option.
Okay.
As opposed to
So the
slaughtering.
probably
some might not.
that's
I got
different.
Sunday morning. Give him the name Moses. Says your name will name you.
His mother.
Yeah. So
One of the Psalms
it's in the
of you.
Up with all kinds of.
open.
That's great.
Some of that stuff is so can't read.
Yeah, don't put. I know we do. You know.
Okay, we'll wait for another minute and then get started.
I don't know, a group of about a dozen of us, friends, went to last Thursday, Reagan. Ostrich. Oh. It's been advertised for months. You must be working on your PhD, so. Yeah.
But I.
You know what? Have one of our lost their, but it was so, it was done except with, well, months. Most of it's already sold. And what was sold out for our town, I would say 75%. I guess. That was very impressive. Huh? They paid $30 a ticket. Huh? Good. Okay. Good.
Okay, everyone. Good morning. Let's get started. So last week we went up to the beginning of the concentration camps, and we ended pretty much with Chelmno in 1941 and the experimentation of Zyklon B gas and etc. And I think we all agreed we don't need to go past that. We all know what happened, and we don't need to know any more details. So Rosalie suggested that we finish up today with some modern Germany stuff to put us in a better frame of mind and to understand that Germany now is not what Germany was. So we're going to do that. If there's time, I'll begin Hungary today. And Hungary. No, I'll begin the country of Hungary, which is half of my DNA. Okay. Yes. India this year? No. We're going to have to wait until the next. Yes. Yes, I will bring it back for you. Yes, it's wonderful. Yes. I think so too. We did Greece. Yeah. We did Greece. I was, you threw me for a second. I'm like, how could I forget Greece? No, wait, we did Greece. Okay. It's all right. It's okay. Okay. So, since the late 1980s, the Jewish population of Germany has increased steadily and in a large way, whereas other diaspora Jewish communities have decreased. Germany's diaspora Jewish community has increased a lot. At its peak, it was about 150,000. Now, if we compare that, numbers from 2020, France's Jewish population at the time was 220,000. I have since read reports that it has increased a lot since then. Yes. The UK, about 300,000. And then comes Germany at about 118,000 in the year 2020. And most German Jews prefer an urban life in Berlin. That by far is the largest city that has Jews. Now, if we contrast that, in the 1950s, there were only about 20,000 Jews. And some of them were in East Germany and some of them were in West Germany. So we're talking 1950s before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Which happened when? Does anybody know? Berlin Wall? Almost. A little later. Little later. It's demolished in 94. 94. It is torn down in 94. Most of the Jews at the time lived in West Germany. They preferred to live under a democratic situation rather than a communist situation. And those Jews apparently saw their lives mostly in transit. They thought Germany was the place where they are now, but a majority felt, well, we're going to Israel. That was their goal. And these were older German Jews. What they found was that the younger German Jews and the younger Jews who emigrate, and this is where that large population increase comes from. Anybody know what country? No? Russia. Eastern Europe and Russia. Yep. Jews immigrate from Eastern Europe in a big way. During the 1980s, 40 to 50,000 Jews come. And the post-war generation that had been born in Germany and the willingness to kind of trust that the Germans learned their lesson from World War II and things were going to be okay, made it so that the aspirations of the Jews to go to Israel was only the aspirations of the older Jews. The young people, this is all they knew, and they didn't know war. They didn't know when times were bad. And so for them, staying in Germany wasn't bad because this was their home, and this is where they grew up. This is what they knew. In the 1990s, we have massive immigration from the former Soviet Union. When does the Soviet Union fall? Dissolve. 91, very good. So 91 is the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 94 is the ultimate demolition of the Berlin Wall. Ah, wow. Hmm. The end of the fall. It starts, I mean, the fall of the Soviet Union happens in stages and slowly, but okay, that's fine. It began in 89, ended in 1991. So the ultimate final fall was in 91, which began in 89. Okay, I'm okay with that. No, I said Berlin Wall. Then the demolition, the final demolition was 94 then. Okay, and I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with that too. So for those of you online, what Susie said was that her son was there at the time at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and he brought back a piece of the wall, which Susie has in her living room at the moment. Ah, okay. The comment is that you were there 3 years ago. You said okay, and they point out very specifically that this was November 9th, 1989, not to be confused, obviously, with Kristallnacht. Interesting that that's 50 years later from Kristallnacht. Yes, how things have changed. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Jews, and you have the massive immigration to Germany, Jews were granted residence permits and work permits, and as well as some social rights within German society. there were approximately, in all, 250,000 Jewish immigrants. However, many included non-Jewish family members. And the reason for that is because the German government, in order to characterize who was Jewish, defined it as someone who had one Jewish parent, either father or mother. So it was not a halachic definition of who was Jewish. And as we know, just as an aside very quickly, so the halachic definition is your mom has to be Jewish or you have to convert. Those are the two ways you become a halachic Jew. The Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement recognize patrilineal descent as long as the child has been brought up Jewish. So if you have a child who's got a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother who's been going to church his whole life and then wants to recognize himself as a Jew later on, that's not going to work. Even for Reform congregations, that's not going to work. And this happens all the time. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. I hear it all the time. Well, he's half Jewish. I'm Jewish, his mother's not. And depending on whom I'm speaking with, it's like, but sometimes I have had to say, look, I'm sorry, your child's not Jewish, is not half Jewish. There's no such thing. No such thing exists. Half Jewish does not exist. Mother Jewish or not Jewish. That's it. Yes, Susie. Ha ha ha. So Susie says, even if the bottom half of the boy, fill in the blanks. All that means, well, you'd be hard pressed to find a moil who's going to do that in a ritual. You know, he may have been circumcised, but who would be hard pressed to find a moil who will do a Brit Milah for someone who is not halachically Jewish. The child may be, the male boy may be, the male boy, obviously. The boy, the boy may be, in fact, circumcised. But that doesn't mean he is ritually circumcised and has a Brit Milah. Yes, Joette. Yes. Okay, great point. Joette says she has known of a Brit Milah to be done on a boy who has a non-Jewish mother if it's for the purpose of conversion. Okay, that makes total sense. Yes, absolutely. The British royal family has a moil who circumcises their sons. I didn't know that, and that's very... Oh, it's not a Brit. Oh, it's not a Brit. Oh, but they just want a moil to do it. Okay, well, that's fine. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Of course. Of course. Of course, those pointed out, of course. What's your name? Jimmy? Jim. Jim says, of course, those numbers are important. They were very important to the Nazis, right? Because having one Jewish grandparent put you in the category of being Jewish. All right. So Germany, the government, in order to count who is Jewish, said, if either of your parents is Jewish, then you are Jewish. All right. However, within the Jewish communities of Germany, they adhered to a halachic stance. So you may have been a Jew according to the federal government, but you are not halachically Jewish according to your Jewish community. And so that is why there were many people who were classified as Jews who immigrated, but if we look at the people who are counted as Jews within Jewish communities, it's a much lower rate. And a lot of that obviously had to do with intermarriage. Obviously, one parent is not Jewish, clearly, and it's the mother to not be counted in these Jewish communities. Now, that is not unusual for people coming from Eastern Europe and Russia, right? You were not allowed to be Jewish, not allowed to practice Judaism in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. I do many funerals for Russian families. And obviously these are older people, and they know nothing about the tradition. Not their fault. They weren't allowed. So when it comes to Kaddish, I can have 30 Russian in front of me, and I'm the only one who knows how to say Kaddish. It's every time it's like, oh, okay, it's not their fault. They didn't know. They weren't allowed to practice. Nobody taught them. They weren't allowed. So because they were not religious and they didn't know about the tradition, marrying outside of the religion was not a big deal. Consequently, you had many who immigrated who were the product of a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman. Okay. So the Jewish communities in Germany today, and there are a number of Jewish communities, have about 100,000 registered members. Probably a little more now. And again, there's another 50,000 who aren't recognized as Jews by the community, but by the government, yes. And immigration from Russia is ongoing. About 10,000 Jews a year. Presently, about 83,000 of that population are post-Soviet Jews. In other words, they came following the fall of the Soviet Union, and many of them are young, well-educated arrivals. So we already had the young Jews who were in Germany, and they already had their life there, so they weren't planning to leave, even though their parents and grandparents might have been. And then we have a whole influx of young, well-educated Jews coming from Russia and the Soviet Union. Most of the immigrants chose to join Jewish communities, but as we just talked about, they weren't educated in the tradition or the Jewish mindset. They didn't know a lot about being Jewish. Now, we've seen this kind of situation before in our history. Where have we seen this? We saw this in Amsterdam with the influx of conversos, right? The influx of conversos leaving Spain and Portugal. One of the places they go is Amsterdam. And Amsterdam had a very well-established religious community, an observant religious community. However, the conversos came and wanted to be accepted into the Jewish communities of Amsterdam. The problem was they didn't know anything about being Jewish. And so, by all accounts, the people of Amsterdam were, the Jews of Amsterdam were, oh God, these people. Well, we got to teach them how to light Shabbat candles. We got to teach them what prayers to say. We got to teach them everything. It was annoying. It was annoying. They didn't want to have to deal with that. And so it was a problem. We saw this in reverse when it came to immigration to the United States, right? Because the first wave of immigrants to the United States in the late 1800s was from where? Germany. These were well-educated, affluent German Jews. Reform, assimilated Jews. They came to New York and they established themselves very nicely in society. The next humongous wave of immigration came from Eastern Europe in the early 1900s. They were poor, very uneducated, everything was folklore. They came to New York, and the German Jews who were already there were aghast. Oh my God, these people are embarrassing us. Look at them. Look at them. They're embarrassing us. So we saw that in reverse. So here in Germany now, we have young, well-educated Jews, but they don't know anything about being Jewish. In 2003, the federal government signed a state treaty with the Central Council of Jews, pledging $3.3 million a year to support Jewish immigration. The Russian majority has not become fully integrated into these Jewish communities. They don't have governing responsibilities within the communities yet. And there's tension between the old-timers and these new Russians. Tension because, for instance, the new Russians who are coming in are speaking Russian. The old-timers are speaking German. And so the question is, what are we going to be speaking in these communities? What's our language? Now, clearly, because there are so many Russians who have immigrated, then the Russian communities are speaking Russian, period. Russian is pervasive in these communities. However, we all know that so many of the young, well-educated Russians who are immigrating, when you are young and well-educated as a on the side, you are able to adapt much more quickly. You are able to learn a language faster. You're able to understand the culture faster. And so the younger immigrants have had a much easier time integrating into the Jewish communities. We all know when you're older, it's hard to change. It's difficult. Yes, it is difficult, and we don't always want to. You know, we all know that our grandkids can run circles around us 4 times on the computer and the telephone. And so all of us, we have to go to. I try. I'm not that old, but even me, it's like some of these things. It's like, no, I don't. No. I don't want that. I don't want to know about it. But Dad, if you do this, everything will go so much faster. You'll be no, I'd rather write it down on the paper in front of me because then I can hold it and I can see it, and this is what I was used to. So they're very, they don't remember a time when there weren't cell phones or computers. We all remember very much a time when we didn't have cell phones or computers, and we went to the library and we pulled out the library cards and we had to go through the entire stock and then go through the stacks to find our. Okay. And now you have AI. Yes, that's going to be terrible. Yes, Zisel wants to point out. Very good. So Zisel said he wants to point out that the biggest factor in being able to adapt is youth. The younger the person, the easier it is for them to adapt. Hang on one second. Jim. So the question is, who are the old-time German Jews that I spoke about? What do you think? What Jews? So look, We know that World War II and the Holocaust wiped out 6 million of our people. So after the war, immediately after the war, were there Jews in Germany? Sure, there were some. Sure. What happened after the war? Jews went to displaced person camps, right? And they ended up going to various places. Some went back to Germany. Some stayed in Germany. So they were old-timers and their families were old-timers, for sure. And then people who immigrated right after the war, yes, they would consider themselves old-timers by 1990 and 2000. Sure, sure. Lana. So Lana knows who was it? A Spanish-speaking student who came here. She was 62 years old, and 9 months after coming here, because of 9 months working with her one-on-one, she was able to speak English fluently. Her family thought she was stupid, but she wasn't. She was like a sponge. You know what? I think we are all, we all have abilities that we don't even imagine we have. And they come out when we have to do things, when we have to learn things, when we have to know things. We sit down and we do it. And yeah, it comes easier, as Cecil said, when we're younger, for sure. It just does. Learning Hebrew as an adult is much more difficult than learning Hebrew as a child, because you just you don't ask questions about, well, why do you just go, okay, it sounds like this, so I say it like this. And it's much easier. But as adults, we're smarter and we question stuff, and that makes it sometimes more difficult. And Lana says one more thing. When you were in your 60s last year, she was artistically challenged and couldn't draw anything. Stick figures were bad. And she took lessons. And you are more than competent. That doesn't surprise me at all. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We can all learn new things as adults. Our learning doesn't stop, which is why it's so great that you're here. Because stay sharp. Yes, Gary. But I'll repeat.
Make her happy. Okay. So I taught large groups of either Hispanic or Chinese students. Okay, this will keep everybody happy. So anyway, I taught large groups of either Chinese or Hispanic students whose language skills were generally quite good. But they told me their parents, who were born either in China or someplace in Latin America, barely spoke English. So and that's what happens throughout Los Angeles.
Yes, absolutely. Cecil. He arrived in the States when he was 18 years old. He didn't have problems learning English. And but at the same time, he met another Cuban who was 15 years old, and he learned English even faster than Cecil did. Yes, it's youth. Okay, the brain absorbs a lot. Okay, so it was easier for these young people to learn the language and integrate into the Jewish communities and learn about Jewish customs and things. and learn our cultural heritage. The difficulties involved with this immigration is that German identity was based on really on an ethnic identity. And so there was xenophobia. And in very modern times, as we know, the growth of the far right is very much there. It's growing here, it's growing there. What does German law prohibit? German law prohibits denying the Holocaust or disseminating any Nazi propaganda. And as a result of some hate crimes increase in 2019, 2020, Germany has strengthened their hate crimes laws as well. Wonderfully, Germany has a terrific rabbinic college. It's called the Abraham Geiger College. It's in Berlin. Does Abraham Geiger ring a bell? Vaguely. Okay, we went over this last week. So the two main proponents that end up forming Reform Judaism were Abraham Geiger and Samuel Holdheim. Abraham Geiger is a huge name in Jewish tradition, certainly in the Reform movement, huge name. Abraham Geiger's reform in Germany at the time was kind of a moderate reform. Samuel Holdheim's reform was a very radical reform, Judaism. And Geiger's reform caught on in Germany. Holdheim's did not. The radical reform did not catch on in Germany. Holdheim came here to the United States. It caught on big time here in the United States. So American reform is a product of Samuel Holdheim. German reform is a product of Abraham Geiger. And as we know, the reform movement in the United States began very radical reform, and has moved steadily right into something that is now kind of moderate. And we should all be very cognizant, because I think it's very bad for us to put labels and to separate ourselves from other Jews. You know, these are ritual and halakhic issues. So Reform Jews either voluntarily or they choose or choose not to keep kosher. Okay, it's their business. I don't care if they eat pork chops for dinner. I don't. Between them and God, right? What do I do care? Are you coming to pray to synagogue? Are you leading your life in a way that exemplifies Jewish values in the world? Do we understand that we try to not do to our neighbor what we find hateful to ourselves? Okay, that's all I'm concerned with. So reform's good, conservative's good, Orthodox is good. It's all good. It's all good. Yes, Joette. Great. Joette says there is a conservative rabbinical school in Germany now as well. Do you know something about it? Can you tell us something? Very nice. So it's the Zachariah Frankel School, and it's affiliated with the Ziegler School in here. Now, that's another name you should know. We went over that as well. Zachariah Frankel. Who was he? Okay, Zachariah Frankel is a very, very important figure. So Abraham Geiger and Samuel Holdheim initiate Reform Judaism. Probably the two biggest proponents and the two people who sort of launch things. Moses Mendelssohn launches the ideas prior to them, but they put it into action. In response to Reform Judaism, Samson Raphael Hirsch creates Neo-Orthodoxy. So, Samson Raphael Hirsch was an Orthodox rabbi, and he said about the reforms that Geiger and Holdheim put out, he said, oh, you know, you guys, there's a little bit of something to what you've said, but you reformed things way too much. So, you know, maybe Jews can dress like everybody else, and we can sort of integrate a little bit into society a little bit and maybe learn some secular things. That's okay. The rest of the stuff, you guys went way too far. We're not okay with that. And you know Neo-Orthodoxy here, the closest thing to it might be modern Orthodoxy. We have modern Orthodox men and women who are integrated in all parts of society. They work, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're scholars, they're politicians, they wear the same clothes as everybody else, and they're functioning within our society, as opposed to Hasidim, who don't do that. All right. In response to Hirsch's Neo-Orthodoxy, Zacharias Frankel, who was a Hungarian Jew, so good, we're on Hungary, or coming up to it, who was a Hungarian Jew, said, you're both wrong. You reformers took out way too much. You Neo-Orthodoxy, you keep too much. There's something right down the middle for us. And he called it positive historical Judaism. You want to keep all the positive things about Judaism, looking at its history with regard for its history. Positive historical Judaism. When positive historical Judaism gets exported to the United States, it becomes conservative Judaism, the middle way. And as we have all sort of experienced in our lives, being conservative Jews, it's a tricky boat to navigate. It's a tricky, because for reform, everything is, all the ritual commandments are voluntary. You can choose to or not to. Okay, you know your position. In the Orthodox, everything is obligatory. You must. In the middle, you must, but there are times when you don't have to. It becomes very, it becomes difficult to navigate. And we're seeing that all over the place. People prefer to know for sure. And so the growth of Reform Judaism has been tremendous. The growth of Orthodox Judaism has been tremendous. The growth of conservative Judaism, we have to classify as a decline, not a growth.
I think this is the perfect time for me to tell the story of my husband, who grew up in Speyer, Germany. And the stories he told us were the following. There were always forks and spoons in the dirt on the porch because they kept kosher. He was thrilled when he was allowed to sit with his father on the bottom floor instead of up with his mother, so there was obviously separate seating. But their shul had an organ. And Gunther used to talk about when he was downstairs, he could see the rabbi push this little button under the whatever, and yes, and that was the signal for the organ to start playing. And the story always struck me so strange. Were they Orthodox? Why an organ? A button? So that's the story that he used to tell.
Thank you. One of the first and biggest reforms within Reform Judaism was to put the organ in in the synagogue and allow organ music, and that was very much not okay with the older Orthodox Jews. Okay, I'll repeat it. Even within conservative Judaism, we have divisions because some of us have more conservative positions and some of us have more liberal, progressive. Yes, absolutely so. Absolutely so. And as the years have gone on, many of us, not all of us, but many of us have been willing to adapt to certain things. When I took over the synagogue in 2000 and I proposed having the piano play on Erev Rosh Hashanah, oh my God, it was a hornet's nest. And if Janice were here, she would know. Abe was the first one to say, you know what, let's give it a try. Let's give it, and Abe was the de facto patriarch of the congregation. And so we gave it a try. And afterwards, everyone said, oh, that wasn't so bad. It was kind of nice. So the next year, can I have it on the first day of Rosh? Oh my God! Oh my! Okay, we'll give it a try. And every year, first day, second day, Kol Nidre. The last stall was Yom Kippur Day. They told me, Mark, we've gone with you up until now. Don't push for Yom Kippur Day. It's not going to happen. 2 years later, I got it on Yom Kippur Day and nobody said a word. Everybody loved it. Jim. You descended from those Jews who immigrated in the late 1800s. Both your grandfathers went to Yale. Wow. In between the wars, one of the grandfathers went back to visit Germany. And just recently you recovered a letter that his mother sent to him. And in the letter, she referred to Germany as the fatherland. You definitely would not hear that anymore. So that goes back to our point earlier that Germans identified themselves very ethnically, as many countries, the people of many countries identify ethnically, for sure. So to finish up Germany, the Abraham Geiger College is state-funded. State-funded. People go there for free. And they attract many students from Eastern Europe and Russia who want to bring Judaism back to their countries, various countries. It is based off of, as you might imagine, since Abraham Geiger was a Reform rabbi, progressive, according to their website, progressive, modern, and enlightened spiritual leadership. And it's based on the curriculum and the programs from the Reform seminaries here in the United States. As a contrast to that, I should also point out the last thing, that I found over 20 Chabad houses throughout Germany, in all the major cities. Everybody has a Chabad. So all of the major movements then are represented in Germany at the moment. And I think all we can say is that by and large, Germany has tried, and if you don't agree with this, you are more than welcome to tell me you're crazy, Rabbi. Germany has tried since World War II to I don't want to say make up for, because that can't be done. To what? Repent, atone, try to move forward in a with a different idea. They have made an effort to try to understand the past, learn from it, and to move forward in a healthy way. No, the Nazi Party is absolutely prohibited. Because we have a freedom of expression, of speech, of religious expression, and it's a great thing, and sometimes it's problematic. But we live in the greatest country on the planet, so, well, Gary says he's not so sure about that. I think all of us have grave concerns about the direction of things, but we know the far right is becoming more powerful, more vocal, all over the world, actually. Certainly we have it here in the United States, and it's frightening, but it's here. And so like every other generation before that, our generation and the ones, our children, they're going to have to combat it and stomp it out. Yes, Joette. Oh, Joette says she's lived in Germany for 3 years. She has a couple of anecdotes. Sure, we'll end with that today.
Well, may I say my thing too?
Of course.
Joette.
And remember all, administratively, next week is our last class this semester.
Germany is giving dual citizenship for anyone who wants it now. And interestingly enough, my son even said, I wish I had known, because his daughter is going to France. And if he had it, she could be part of the EU and get cheaper tickets, and which is kind of interesting. But I do want to tell you, in the 90s, Gunther and I went back to Speyer, and he was asked to speak to the Russian community. It was late afternoon, so there were no young people there. They were all older. And I don't remember us asking if there were, the younger people would have been working. So the women did not, the men and women did not speak German well enough for him to give his talk in German. So they had a translator translating what he said in German to Russian. And it was, they were just enthralled with listening to Gunther, and they were so nice, and they said, could we stay a little longer? And one of the people went and got a keyboard, and they started singing some of the music that Gunther had grown up with. And he was just overwhelmed being in Germany and hearing the music from his youth.
So, as most of you know, my husband was a rabbi in the Air Force, and we were stationed in Germany from 1985 to 1988. And in that time, we traveled throughout the country. When we did, we would go to Jewish cemeteries. And the Jewish cemeteries that are there are currently maintained by the local governments of wherever they are. And we noticed that if you looked at the tombstones in the cemetery, the dates of the people's passing stopped in 1939 and resumed in the 1960s. So people who came back after the war or who had survived the war and lived in Germany started dying again in the 60s. The other thing that we found, Marv was fluent in Yiddish, And because he also knew Hebrew, he knew which words in Yiddish came from the Hebrew. So he would speak to people in Yiddish, not using the Hebrew words, and everybody understood him. And most often the response was, "You speak such a beautiful Altdeutsch, but we know you're not from this region of Germany." So his Yiddish was not the same as anybody's German, but completely recognizable. And the other thing that I'd like to share is that we went to Berlin while the wall was still up. We were stationed, obviously, in West Germany, and the military had special conditions for us to go to East Germany, because Berlin was in the center of East Germany. So we were on an overnight train. So we left from, I think it was Frankfurt, and we got on the train, and at, I don't know, something like 2 in the morning, we crossed the border into East Germany, and the train was locked from the outside. And the feeling was a little uncomfortable, to say the least, to be on a locked train in Germany. But the purpose of it was to keep the East Germans from getting onto our train. And then once we passed the border into Berlin, into West Berlin, the train was unlocked, and we got to the station. We were in Berlin. Well, we also wanted to go to the eastern side, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie. And the military had a bus for us to go to East Berlin. And most of the military who wanted to go shopping and buy Leica cameras and binoculars and all of that. We wanted to see a synagogue on the eastern side. So the rules of the 4 countries who took over Berlin after the war, the rules were that in order for us to go from the west to the east, if you were military personnel, you had to wear your uniform. And so we get on the bus, and we get to Checkpoint Charlie, and they came on, they looked at everybody's passports and whatever, and we could go through. And we went to what is called the Alexanderplatz in East Berlin, which is a big open area, and it has shops all around, and that's where most of the people wanted to go. So the other rule that we had is that when we were in the east, we were not allowed to get into any vehicle. We couldn't get into a bus or a taxi or anything like that. We could only walk. Fortunately for us, the synagogue that we wanted to see was 10 blocks from the Alexanderplatz. And so we started walking, and as we got farther and farther from the Alexanderplatz, we got very strange looks from the local people who were not used to seeing somebody in an American military uniform. So we got to the synagogue. Somehow we found the person who was in charge of unlocking it so that we could go in. It sort of had been used, but it was pretty run down. Obviously, the East German government was not willing to maintain it. So, so we got to see it, and then went back. And the other thing is that if you looked at the Berlin Wall, which most people have seen pieces of it now, the western side was all painted up with fancy colors and graffiti and everything, and the eastern side was drab gray, and that was it. So it was very interesting to have that experience. And then recently, maybe 5-10 years ago, I was back in Berlin. So now Checkpoint Charlie is just a tourist spot. And for me, I was very glad because when I was in Berlin the first time, I could only see the back of the Brandenburg Gate because it was on the eastern side and it wasn't anywhere near where we were when we went to East Berlin. But this time I got to see the front of the Brandenburg Gate. And there's beautiful Jewish museum and Holocaust memorial there now.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so we'll finish up next week. We'll finish the semester next week with Hungary. And then we will resume the letter H when we come back the next semester. Wonderful. All right, everyone, have a beautiful week.
Bye-bye.
Say it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we would like to start. Ladies and gentlemen, Rosie, it is my pleasure to introduce our Director of Youth Engagement, Rabbi Emily Holtzman, and she will tell us a little about herself and has an interesting program for us, and I thank you ahead of time for taking your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie, for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. I know I've seen many of you on campus, so I'm excited to be in this space with all of you. I normally work with the kids, and so it's really a wonderful opportunity to be here in this space with all of you because I've heard wonderful things about this program. So as Susie mentioned, my name is Rabbi Emily Holtzman. I'm the Director of Youth Engagement here at Adat Ariel. I do everything from TK to 12th grade, except for B'nai Mitzvah. The cantor is in charge of all of that. So that means I run the religious school, the youth group, any teen programs, family programs. It's a big job. But it's very exciting. I just graduated from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in actually about a year ago at this point, which is just crazy to think about it. I was in school for 6 years at the AJU, or the UJ. Before that, I received my master's in Jewish education and Jewish studies from Hebrew College, which is in Boston, while I was working at ECAR, which is a spiritual community in the city. I am originally from Agora Hills, so I have an 818 area code, so I am a valley local. I grew up in Agora, went to Agora High, and went to the University of Oregon. My grandfather was from Portland, and so I went back up to Oregon because it was too sunny down here, and I was ready for some rain. And also my skin tone doesn't really match with the California weather. It was so wonderful being up there. I was an art history major and a Judaic studies minor. And at some point, because I had been going to summer camp for a very long time, I grew up at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple camps at Hilltop and Hess Kramer that were in Malibu, and one day we'll be in Malibu again. I wanted to be a Jewish educator, I wanted to be a rabbi, and I thought that it was really important for me to go study in Israel for a little bit. So I spent the first part of my senior year studying in Israel at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I came back, and when I graduated from college, I worked at Sinai Temple in their preschool for about a year and a half. So between graduating from college and starting rabbinical school, I worked at probably 10 different Jewish organizations, probably more if I counted them, as a youth advisor, as a religious school director, as a religious school teacher, and all sorts of things. So I've worked in reform shuls, I've worked in conservative shuls, non-denominational, and it's just been really wonderful to be able to pass the wonders of our tradition onto the next generation, which to me is the most important thing, because they're the future generation and we want them to be excited about Judaism. So last year I had the pleasure of being an intern, a spiritual intern at Beit Tshuva, which is a Jewish recovery center for drugs and alcohol and gambling in the city. That was started by an alum of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, Mark Borowitz, about 30 years ago. And so what's interesting about Beit Tshuva is that they have a spiritual component, right? So everyone has a therapist and a case manager, as in other recovery centers, but they also have a spiritual counselor. Because at Beit Tshuva, it's really important to take care of the whole, and to not just focus on the intellectual and the emotional, but also to have a spiritual component as well. And so one of the things that we did every week is we worked on something called tshuva sheets. Now, if we're going to translate tshuva, how would you translate to shuva? Repentance? Yeah? Return? Yeah. So it's this idea of coming back to yourself, right? That there's always a path for you to come back to who you are, no matter what we do. We're human. We mess up. We're not perfect. Every day, we do things that maybe we wish we didn't do, or we said something to someone that we maybe wish we didn't say, but there's always a path to return. And that's something that's so incredibly important in the world of recovery, right? Because these people have been through all sorts of things, whether it's living on the streets or being in jail or having a bad relationship with their parents or having no relationship with their family. But to give them hope that there is always a chance to renew and to return to who you are. And we have that chance every single day, right? We say prayers that talk about renewing ourselves every single day. And at Beit Tshuva, we have spiritual groups every single week. We call them Tshuva groups. And they have this sheet, of which I'll pass out in a moment. And on the sheet, it has a quote by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. I think there are 2 quotes by him. Rabbi Mark Borowitz loves Abraham Joshua Heschel. I believe he wrote a book on him, or he's writing a blog on him. And we talk about this idea of missing the mark and hitting the mark, right? Which is another idea about tshuva, that sometimes we miss the mark, and that's okay, because we need to acknowledge when we miss the mark. Again, I don't know about you, but I'm human and I'm absolutely not perfect. It's very frustrating though. Every day I'm like, why am I not perfect? Because I'm human, right? And we mess up. And so every week, the tshuva groups look at one way we missed the mark during the week and ways that we did that, and equally as important, ways that we hit the mark, ways that we did well. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's very easy to fill out the miss the mark side, right? I can name 7 things that I did wrong this week, 7 people that I offended, ways that I can make it better. But it's actually really hard sometimes to think about the ways that I did well this week and to acknowledge that and say, yeah, I'm proud of myself. I did well this week. So in a moment, I'm going to pass these out, and we're going to take a moment to fill out these tshuva sheets. So you'll notice on the tshuva sheets that we have a number of questions, both for the hit the mark and the miss the mark side. And there are 3 categories. There's truth, remorse, and responsibility on the miss the mark side, and then there's truth, effect, and responsibility. And each one of them have different questions associated with them, such as, what was my justification for this action? So not just saying, I did something wrong, but why in the moment did I do that wrong? What was my what story was I telling myself in that moment that justified that action? Who did that impact, right? How were they impacted? And then looking at what was learned and what's the plan for not repeating it or changing and growing from it. And it's a little bit of the opposite on the hit the mark side. And I will pass these out in a moment, so you will have all of this, and I have pens as well. I have a second page that looks like this, of which you will have. And this is a beautiful, colorful page that comes from a very, very cool workbook called the Omer Workbook. Now, can someone give me a reminder about what the Omer is? Yes. 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 Mhm. Mhm. Exactly. Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes. And tell me your name. Lana. So Lana was telling us that the Omer is this period, and thank you for reminding me that we have people online as well, is this period between the second day of Passover and Shavuot. So Passover being this exile from freedom, and Shavuot being the revelation of our mitzvot in our tradition, that Moses goes up to the mountain and he gets the commandments to bring back to the people. They're not necessarily ready for that, but they will be. So we count every single day for 49 days. And as Lana said, this is an opportunity for growth. This is an opportunity for us to stop each day for 49 days and say, what have I learned today? What did I learn that is helping me from what I did yesterday? What did I learn that's going to help me tomorrow or next week or in the 2 weeks later? And it's interesting because in Judaism, we already have this practice of stopping every day, 3 times a day, right, to daven, to pray. We have traditionally Jews daven or pray 3 times a day. That's our opportunity to stop and to be in the moment. But this is an extra special time for us to stop in between. And one of the reasons I think that this is such a special period is because we have to grow to freedom, right? Freedom doesn't just come to us automatically. So we escape from Egypt, we cross the sea, And then we complain a whole lot. We complain a lot it's too hot, I'm hungry, life was better in Egypt, I miss the fish, I miss the cucumbers, right? We have these like rosy colored glasses about what slavery was like, right? But we were slaves. And so when you're thinking about a big idea of a people becoming free or even a personal freedom, it's not something that comes automatically. It's something that we have to work towards. And so these 49 days give us the tools to be able to look at where we've come and to see where we're going as well. So I really encourage you, and you still have time. The Omer is still happening. So today is day 34, but there's all sorts of workbooks that commemorate each of the 49 days. So this is the one I really like. I've been using it for about 2 years. And some days I've done the last 3 years, and some days I've done none, but it gives you an opportunity to think about what's happening in that day. Another thing about the Omer is it's connected to the Sefirot, to the holy aspects of God, and so each day and each week is representative of one of the Sefirot. If anyone has a better translation of Sefirot. 49 characteristics of God, holiness of God. It's part of Kabbalah, of which I am absolutely no expert in. But it's an opportunity for us to look at these holiness aspects and really apply them to ourselves. So the one that is represented today is Yisod within Hod. And as I pass this around, you're going to see a couple of translations for that. So Yisod can be foundation, bonding, grounding, truth. Hod can be simplicity, humility, awe, majesty. And each day, we look at one of these aspects. So each week is one of the 7 aspects, and then within each day, it's one of the 7 aspects of that week. And so a number of workbooks have come out that associate what is happening with the Sefirot to what is happening to us personally. So I'm going to pass these out right now. So you should be getting a sheet with 3 sides, 2 pieces of paper with 3 sides, and a pen as well. And if we don't have enough copy, the pens are coming around. Anyone not have a copy of the sheet? Raise your hand. Oh, we need one over here. Perfect, thank you. I have one, so you should have one too. Here, I can help pass the pens around. Okay, does everyone have a pen and a sheet? Wonderful. Okay, so here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to take, let me see what time it is. We're going to take the next 7 minutes or so to look through the miss the mark and the hit the mark sheet and just take a moment to fill it out. And if you don't get through everything, that's okay. But take a moment to fill it out. And then we're going to get into partners, or we're going to get into little small groups, and we're going to go over whatever you would like to go over. You are welcome to share. You are also welcome to just listen. So just take a few moments, and this is just for this week, right? So you can start from last Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? It's Wednesday. Yes, last Wednesday. You can start from Sunday. Whatever this week means to you. And it doesn't also need to be anything big. It can be maybe an interaction with someone. And if you're having a hard time thinking about the miss the mark, you can move on to the hit the mark and give yourself a little bit of gratitude for what you did do this week. All right, if you're still filling it out, please feel free to continue. But if you want to turn to your neighbor, you can maybe form groups of 2 or 3 or 4, however that works out. And again, you don't need to share your entire page or any of your page, but just talk about what this experience is like, because I would imagine it's a little bit different than something that you've done in this class before. Maybe it stretched you a little bit. Maybe you're feeling a little resistant to it, which I completely understand. But it's a tool that I bring you that I think really doesn't just apply to the world of recovery. I think it really can apply to all of our lives. So take the next 5 or 6 minutes just to talk through what this experience was like with someone. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy. All right, I'm going to ask everyone to come to a comfortable or uncomfortable stopping place. You can finish your sentence. Thank the people that you were in a group with for the conversation. I'm going to show some gratitude. So I would love to hear from anyone who is willing to share just about the experience of this. How was this experience, both doing this exercise yourself and then sitting and talking to another person or two, either about the exercise or about what you wrote down? What was that experience like? Anyone willing to share? Yeah.
I think we all make mistakes, might regret them, and maybe apologize and so forth. And we also might be proud of certain things we've done. But what this does is lay out kind of a roadmap. And we have to consider who was impacted and how they were impacted. What I learned, I don't know that we always think things through that thoroughly. And it's important, not all that complicated, but it would enable us to do better next time by following that regimen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing. Again, this isn't just a what I did wrong and what I did wonderful, right? There's a step-by-step process about this to really, really think about how this impacted me, how this impacted other people, and sometimes we forget that our actions impact other people in ways that we have absolutely no idea because of whatever they're going through and their own trauma and their life, or what they had for breakfast that morning, right? It just, we have no idea. Yeah, will you come up here and share?
I just wanted to share the fact that when I first saw the paper, that I thought it was a very personal kind of a situation, that when you first look at it, that it's like between you and someone else, and that the thought process to go on and to share with other people was not scary, but maybe not something that you would want to open yourself up to. But I found that when I wrote something down and then I got with my other cohorts over there, that the three different things were, three ideas that we had were actually so different. One was actually actions, thought processes of what we had gone through, and I think that we sort of helped each other after we talked about it, that how we could help ourselves get through the situation. So it's great.
Thanks for sharing. And this is one of the ideas, especially in recovery, but around these tshuva circles, is that we might be going through something very personal, right? That either we know no one else can relate to, or we think no one else can relate to, but in these tshuva circles, we take the 10 or 15 minutes to fill out these forms, and then everyone goes around and shares a couple of things on their tshuva sheet exactly for that reason. Because we have no idea what other people's inner lives are like. We think we know, right? But we are not mind readers. I like to think I'm a mind reader, but I'm absolutely not a mind reader. And it's sometimes so hard to get out of our own narrative and our own head and the story that we're telling ourselves, the story we're telling about ourselves, the story we're telling about other people, right? And when we can take a step back and even just listen to what other people are going through, we think, oh, I have some insight into this. Even though I'm not in that exact position now, or I've never been in that exact position, there's something similar in my life. And so that sharing is such an essential part of the recovery process, but I also think it's just an essential part of life, right? That's why we have chavruta study, right? Chavruta study, studying with a partner, studying with a group, because we have what's going on in our head and how we're interpreting the text, but when you hear it from someone else, right? They might be coming from a completely different angle or see something different in the text that makes you think, oh, I didn't notice that before, right? They talk about chavruta study, partner study, being like knives sharpening knives, right? You can't sharpen a knife without another edge, right? You can't do it yourself. You can sit and you can study yourself, right? But you're not going to get that back and forth, that feedback from someone else, that sharpening of the wits, if you don't have someone else to kind of counteract that. So thank you for sharing. Any final thoughts on this process, how it felt, uncomfortable, very comfortable, resistant?
For us, it was like you understand that other people have very similar problems, so you're not alone.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You are not alone, right? We are all going through things. We all have our inner lives that we're working with every single day, but we are not alone. And when we take the opportunity to share with other people about what's happening in our lives, we open ourselves up to a world of possibility that might not be comfortable at first and feel very vulnerable and feel very raw, but it really helps us grow as human beings and allow us to have empathy for other people in the world. So the reason that I brought this today is because as I was going through my Omer workbook, I noticed that I had a tshuva sheet from last year. And I would regularly fill out a tshuva sheet when I was in a group. And the tshuva sheet, it's dated 5/20/22, and it says what and how I did well this week. And this was the week that I became a rabbi last year. And I kept it in my Omer workbook. I didn't keep all of my tshuva sheets, but I kept this one in my tshuva sheet because, as I mentioned at the beginning, that what did you do well this week was always really hard for me. I tend to be a pessimist. I tend to think about all of the things that I did wrong and all of the people that I harmed. But I took a moment to say, 6 years of study, 13 years of wanting to be a rabbi, and I did that this week. And I had a job, which was really great. And so to be able to look back on that a year later and say, wow, I was so proud of myself last year, even though I have 17 million things I have to do and all of these people I need to talk to, and we're getting ready for next year and registration and the budget and all of that. I did what I set out to do. And it took me 6 years of study to get there, and I wanted to give myself like a pat on the back for that. So thank you so much for all engaging in this exercise. I really appreciate that you all just kind of delved headfirst into it, and thank you for having me in this group today. My pleasure. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk, or any comments.